The Retrobit generation is one of the weirdest little retro game consoles I've ever seen. Joystick. Retrobit decided to get into the plug-in retro console craze after the NES Classic Edition, and they made one of the strangest plug-in consoles ever, made with some very good, very wacky, very obscure games. It has HDMI output, but it also has old school AV for CRT TVs, and that's how I'm going to be playing them. Released in 2016, right when Nintendo launched and then sold out of the NES Classic Edition, and they came so close to pulling it off. The design of the unit is pretty good. I love the fact that it has both HDMI output and analog AV output for CRT TVs. It has two Sega Genesis 6-button style gamepads that connect to the system via USB, and they are okay. Retrobit signed deals with Jaleco, Capcom, and Irem, and they got some really good games from a wide variety of home systems and the arcade, and they also padded it out with some complete filler. The cardinal sin of this unit is that they tried to be too aggressive on staying under the original price point of $59. The CPU that they chose is entirely too slow to run most of the games on here. If they had targeted $80, they could have had a much better CPU and actually hit the correct frame rate of the games that they're trying to run. You can tell that the CPU is struggling to draw everything with emulation. These games were not designed for variable hardware like 3D games are. These are 2D games that have absolutely no lower mode to turn things down. When you play these on a CRT, the flickering sprites can actually get out of sync with the CRT display, and some sprites will be invisible, making some games completely unplayable. Playing it on an LCD TV via HDMI also has issues. The colors are darker than they should be, it's not as sharp as other emulation options, and everything seems to be blurry with smoothing that you can't turn off. There's no scan lines or TV filter options either. The frame rate issues are still there, but things don't disappear quite as much. It's still choppy though. The NES games have 1:1 square pixels and not a proper 4:3 aspect ratio with rectangle pixels like CRTs can handle. The NES games they included, like 1943, have inaccurate audio that's missing significant chunks of the musical track. The arcade games on here are almost completely unplayable because they did not code for a frame skip. Everything has choppy slowdown with a ton of lag. It has some really good games on it, but it is woefully bad at playing those games. Now, on to the games. Avenging Spirit. This is a rare Game Boy game, so it's really great to see it on here. It is a little blurry for a Game Boy game, but considering the low resolution source, it's playable. Interestingly enough, this game got a release by Retrobit, as did Holy Diver and others, so it will be interesting to see if other games from this console get released on physical cartridge. Who knows if this little retro emulation device from 9 years ago is a sign of their future cartridge release plans. Captain Commando looks like it's at the proper aspect ratio, but it's not at the proper frame rate. I'll give them a lot of props for having a more obscure Capcom game on here, but I wish it was an arcade-accurate experience. I mean, we are living in the third decade of the 21st century, and there's absolutely no reason to have lag running on an emulator playing a game that's now several decades old. City Connection. I love the Nintendo 8-bit version of City Connection. They have the American version on here and not the superior Japanese version, which features Clarice in her little city car. We got the dopey American version that has the dude bro in it. It's not even running at 60 frames a second. This is a game that requires split-second timing and is unplayable because the cop cars are flickering out of sync with the CRT, causing them to be invisible, making City Connection almost completely unplayable. Forgotten Worlds, the arcade game, had a spinner controller, and I guess they're going with the Sega Genesis style button rotations, and it looks good. The problem is that it's just not at the right frame rate. And this is a shame because Forgotten Worlds is a great game and this console is just simply not cutting the mustard. Ghouls and Ghosts is one of the all-time great Capcom side-scrolling action games, and it has a notorious difficulty. As the on-screen complexity goes up and down, Ghouls and Ghosts Arcade is already challenging, but not playing it at the proper frame rate is making it brutally and unnecessarily difficult. There is Pirate Ship Higemaru for Famicom. Unfortunately, they did not translate anything. Hammerin Harry is more fun than some of the other games on here, and I'm really grateful that Retrobit finally did an American release of this cult classic. This is the one game that has a pretty good gameplay experience on a CRT, and it didn't make me wish I was playing it on more competent hardware. Holy Diver. Yet another awesome Irem game that's included on here, one that Retrobit also recently re-released on NES. Holy Diver is suffering from a couple issues. When things start to flicker, things go invisible, and that's a problem because on NES games, things do a lot of flickering. Kid Niki the Radical Ninja for NES looks okay. So the NES/Famicom version is a pretty well done arcade conversion of an excellent 80s Twitch action ninja game. And except for a couple of graphic frame rate glitches, it's mostly there. Kid Niki the Radical Ninja 2 for Famicom. This is completely untranslated Japanese, and they didn't even update the title screen. Now this is an officially licensed release of this game. I mean, I have a copy of the Famicom version, but I am a Western Famicom nerd. But here is a previously unreleased in the West Irem game on this thing, then right up there with Holy Diver. That is very, very cool. Irem is one of those game developers I don't think gets enough credit. I mean, I'm guilty of that. I'm talking about making videos on Capcom, Konami, and Sega, but Irem was a very accomplished game developer in the 1980s and has really made some really great games over the years. Kung Fu Master 2, so Spartan X2, is from 1991, and this is a sequel to Kung Fu made by different developers and published by Irem, and it has very small sprites. But it's cool that there are some previously not quite distributed in the West games on here, so that's cool. Maru's Mission is on here. Again, this is a Game Boy game, so you're gonna hate yourself unless you set the screen to original. This is an American version of one of the Ninja Jajamaru-kun games. This particular Game Boy game did a whole bunch of weird screen refresh tricks. And I believe you're fighting like Japanese demons and monsters and such. And I'm not 100% certain if this is a proper frame rate, but yeah, it's close. Ninja Jajamaru-kun. So if you're down for some obscure Japanese ninja games that we barely got in the West, this thing has your Kid Niki, but it also has your Ninja Jajamaru-kun. So that's cool. They have sufficiently filled their ninja requirements for this console. This console has more than the USDA daily recommended amount of obscure Famicom ninja games. There is the Genesis version of Mercs on here. Now let's see if it can run at a proper frame rate. No. The answer is no. This is a choppy monstrosity, which is troubling because the Genesis version is already scaled down from the highly detailed arcade original. Pizza Pop. I'm not faulting them for filling this up with some obscure games from Irem, Jaleco, and Capcom. I'm just disappointed that they didn't get this system to run at a proper frame rate for the games that they did put on here. Now, this is one of those games that I would love to get on Famicom cartridge, but it is one of the more obscure games, so it's one of the more expensive games. But thanks to the magic of emulation, EverDrives, and bootleg cartridges, we can finally enjoy Pizza Pop. But I'm not willing to pay $150 to $200 for a legitimate Famicom cartridge. But is Retrobit going to release Pizza Pop on NES? Could be. We never got it in the West, and they are totally down with publishing Jaleco games. R-Type 3, Super Nintendo. This seems to be running okay, which is confusing why some games seem to be working better than others. But surprisingly, when it comes to R-Type 3 on here, I don't hate it. There is some slowdown, but then again, the original Super Nintendo version had some slowdown, so I am pleasantly surprised. Alright, let's try another Super Nintendo game. This is Rival Turf for Super Nintendo. I guess one of the advantages of the Super Nintendo is having a rather slower CPU compared to the Genesis, and apparently easier to emulate on this power-starved, underpowered, obscure little mini console. So I'm guessing that the cop sort of looks like a Tom of Finland-style butch leather daddy, but you know, I'm down for leather daddies cleaning up the streets. Rodland, both the Game Boy and NES versions are on here. It's untranslated Japanese, but considering this game was until very recently unreleased on NES, its inclusion on here is pretty pleasant. Rushing Beat Shura. Oh, no, that is not the right frame rate. Okay, Sun the arcade game. Please run at a decent frame rate. It's an arcade game from 1986. Come on, hardware, you can do it. Nope. It is not doing it. Super Ghouls and Ghosts for Super Nintendo. Super Ghouls and Ghosts is on here, and it looks like it's working. Again, it's not hitting the right frame rate, and it's not as painful as the other games, but still, it's disappointing. Super Noah's Ark 3D. I'm surprised that Super Noah's Ark 3D is on here. Wisdom Tree was an unlicensed Bible game developer, and for some reason, they licensed the Wolfenstein engine. You play as Noah with a slingshot, trying to knock out the animals. I'm impressed that this rather obscure piece of Nintendo lore is on here. Varth, Operation Thunderstorm. This is an arcade tate mode game, and I'm gonna rotate my TV to try it, and it does not work. So this is a tate mode game, but they manually remapped the controls, turning a vertically scrolling tate mode game into a horizontally scrolling game. The chutzpah of this. They didn't put in a screen rotation option, so if you actually manage to play this on a CRT and put it into tate mode, you can't get the proper tate mode controls, so this game is forever in limbo. Totally Rad, or Magic John for those Famicom folks. It works. Creepy Bird. Creepy Bird is a Flappy Bird's clone, a game that is notoriously difficult, and you have to have split-second timing, but due to the frame rate issues, you're not going to get the proper frame rate, so it's not so bad it's good, it's just bad. Yang Warrior Family. This is a bootleg Mega Drive game made for the Chinese market, so it's pretty cool that they got some obscure games on here. The Retrobit Generations was a flop in the West. However, it was a hit in Japan, and there were actually 4 of them with different games on each of them. I ordered a Generations 2 unit from Surugaya, and I'll make a follow-up video, so you better subscribe so you don't miss it. Now, I like Retrobit. I really like their controllers for original hardware, and it was fun to kick the tires on this console. Unfortunately, I can report that most of those tires were completely flat. We are always working on awesome videos on retro video games and other rad stuff, so you better hit that subscribe button so you don't miss it. And also hit that like button and tell YouTube that you like this video. It really helps out. This is 8-Bit Joystick. Stay awesome. Play retro.